The convoy stopped where the road was supposed to be. That was the first sign something was wrong. 30 trucks, 6 half-tracks, 2 fuel carriers, and an ambulance section sat nose to tail on a narrow French road while engines idled, radios crackled, and drivers leaned from their cabs trying to understand why the junction on the map was not in front of them. According to the overlay, the column should have turned north, crossed a secondary road, and reached the forward company before noon. But the road did not turn north. It bent southwest, narrowed between 2 stone walls, and ended in a farm track too tight for armor to pass without backing the entire column into itself. By the time the mistake became obvious, time was already bleeding away. Fuel burned in place. Radio messages overlapped. A supply section missed its window. Wounded men waiting farther up the line stayed where they were, because the ambulance never arrived on schedule. And the worst part was this. Someone had warned them. 18 hours earlier, inside a staff briefing full of officers, a 22-year-old corporal named Daniel Kovacs had looked at the operational map and seen what everyone else had missed, or chosen not to say. The junction was wrong. The overlay was old. The route would fail. He raised his hand and said so. But the American general running the briefing did not hear a warning. He heard a corporal stepping out of place. The column moved anyway. The road proved the corporal right. And when the report finally reached George Patton, he did not ask who had embarrassed a general in front of his staff. He asked the only question that mattered: who was right? 18 hours before the convoy stopped on the wrong road, Corporal Daniel Kovacs was standing near the back of a briefing room where he did not belong in any visible way. The room was full of rank. Colonels stood close to the map table. Majors leaned over the overlays with pencils in their hands. Lieutenant colonels watched the route board in silence, their faces carrying the professional stillness of men who had learned not to react before a general had finished speaking. At the front stood Brigadier General Harold Webb. Webb was not a careless man. That was part of the danger. Careless men are easy to doubt. Webb was confident, polished, and certain in the way senior officers often became certain after too many rooms had gone quiet when they spoke. He traced the proposed route with one finger and described how the column would move before dawn, reach the junction, turn north, and push supplies toward the forward company before noon. Most of the men in the room watched his hand. Kovacs watched the road. That was the difference. Before the war, he had worked with survey maps, drafting lines, field notes, and the stubborn discipline of checking what paper claimed against what ground allowed. He had learned that a road on a map was not a road until the earth agreed with it. Bridges washed out. Towns rebuilt junctions. Old surveys survived longer than the terrain they described, and the overlay Webb was using had that old smell to it. Kovacs saw it first in the junction. The angle was wrong. Then he checked the road spacing against the terrain marks. Still wrong. He looked at the source notation in the corner of the overlay, then did the calculation again in his head. The junction Webb wanted was not where the map said it was. Kovacs felt his throat tighten. He waited. A colonel standing closer to the table leaned forward, stared at the same section, then said nothing. A major touched his pencil to the paper and pulled it back. No one wanted to interrupt Webb. No one wanted to be the officer who questioned a general's route in front of the whole staff. Kovacs understood that. He also understood what would happen if the column reached a road that did not connect. So he raised his hand. His voice came out quieter than he wanted, but clear enough for the room to hear. "Sir, I think the junction is wrong." The room went quiet in the way military rooms go quiet when the wrong man has said the right thing. Kovacs kept his hand halfway raised for a second longer than he meant to. Then he lowered it, because the silence itself had become an order. Every officer in the room seemed suddenly interested in the map, the floor, the pencils in their hands, anything except the corporal standing near the back wall. Brigadier General Webb turned slowly. He did not look angry at first. He looked inconvenienced, as if a minor sound had interrupted the clean movement of a machine. That made the moment worse. Anger could have been answered with apology. Inconvenience suggested Kovacs had become a problem to be removed before the briefing could continue. "What did you say?" Kovacs swallowed once. "Sir, I think the junction is wrong." Webb glanced at the overlay, then back at him. "The route has been cleared." "Yes, sir. But the overlay source date is old. That road network was changed after the flood reconstruction. The junction should be farther southwest." A colonel near the table shifted slightly. He did not speak. Kovacs saw the movement and understood it for what it was. Someone else had noticed. Maybe not the whole error, maybe not the distance, but enough to know the warning deserved a look. Still, the colonel stayed silent, and that silence left the corporal standing alone under the weight of his own correction. Webb stepped away from the table. "Corporal, are you attached to operations?" "No, sir. Map section, G2 support." "Then perhaps you should let operations concern itself with the route." A few men looked down. Kovacs felt heat rise in his face, but he did not retreat, not yet. "Sir, if the column follows this overlay, it will reach the wrong junction. There is no north turn at that point. The road bends southwest." Webb's expression hardened. Not because the warning was impossible, because the corporal had said it clearly enough that ignoring it now required a decision. And Webb made one. "The map has been reviewed. The movement order stands." He turned back to the table before Kovacs could answer. That should have ended it. In a room built on rank, it did end it. No one asked Kovacs to show the source notation. No one sent a runner to verify the junction. No one delayed the route long enough to test the warning against another sheet. The briefing moved on. The pencils moved, the orders were copied, and the wrong road remained on the map, protected not by evidence, but by the rank of the man who refused to check it. The next morning, the road proved what the room had refused to test. At first, nothing looked wrong. The column rolled out before daylight with the confidence of men following a cleared movement order. Headlights stayed hooded. Drivers kept interval. Engines coughed in the cold air, and then settled into the steady mechanical rhythm of a convoy, doing what convoys were built to do: move men, fuel, ammunition, and medical support toward the place where someone else was waiting for them. For the first miles, the overlay seemed honest. Then the road began to disagree. The lead jeep reached the marked junction and slowed. The driver looked left, then right, then back at the map board strapped beside him. The road north was supposed to be there. It was not. There was a bend southwest, a narrow lane between stone walls, and a farm track that looked as if it had not carried anything heavier than a cart in years. The lieutenant in the lead vehicle ordered a halt. That was when the trouble began to multiply. A convoy does not stop cleanly on a narrow road. It folds into itself. Trucks close the gap. Half-tracks edge forward and then have nowhere to go. Fuel carriers sit exposed because there is no room to turn them. Drivers climb down, wave their arms, shout questions, and discover that no one behind them can see what the men in front have found. Within minutes, the radio net was crowded. Lead element halted. Junction not matching overlay. No north turn visible. Request confirmation. Say again route. Repeat, no north turn visible. The words moved backward faster than the vehicles could. Captain Lewis Marlowe, riding near the center of the column, pushed his way forward on foot, and saw the problem before anyone explained it to him. The corporal had been right. Not generally right. Not possibly right. Exactly right. The road Webb had marked did not connect where the overlay said it did. Turning the column around took more than an order. It took time, space, and patience the road did not have. Trucks had to reverse one by one. Half-tracks scraped stone. Men shouted over engines. Fuel burned while vehicles sat still. A supply section missed its movement window, and an ambulance group assigned to move wounded from a forward aid station arrived hours late. No single moment looked like disaster. That was what made it worse. The cost came in pieces. Minutes first, then fuel, then confusion, then men waiting somewhere ahead, wondering why the help they had been promised had not arrived. By noon, everyone on that road knew the truth. The map had been wrong, and the corporal had said so before the first engine ever started. By late afternoon, the delay had become more than a field problem. It had become a report. The first version made it sound ordinary enough. Route obstruction, map discrepancy, column delayed, supply movement adjusted, ambulance section late but accounted for. In an army moving as fast as Patton expected his armies to move, small reports like that appeared every day. Roads washed out, bridges failed, towns changed hands. Maps were never perfect, and the ground had no obligation to match the paper. But this report did not pass quietly. The timing loss was too clean. The radio traffic was too specific. The words repeated from the lead element caught someone's eye before the file reached Patton's desk. No north turn visible. That phrase mattered. It did not sound like a road blocked by debris or enemy fire. It sounded like a road that had never been where the overlay said it was. Patton read the movement summary once, then pushed aside the top sheet and looked for the attachments. Corrected sketch, original overlay, route order, unit log, radio notes. He did not start with anger. He started with paper, because paper was where men left the shape of their mistakes after the noise was over. Captain Lewis Marlowe was called in first. Patton did not ask whether the convoy commander had been embarrassed. He asked how many hours had been lost. Marlowe answered. Patton asked how much fuel had been burned in place. Marlowe answered again. Then Patton asked how late the ambulance section had been. That answer made the room colder. Only after the cost had been named did Patton ask who had cleared the route. Brigadier General Webb's staff, sir. Patton looked down at the overlay. Who checked it? No one gave a clean answer. That was already bad. Then Sergeant First Class Roy Ingle, standing near the edge of the room, said what several men had hoped would not need to be said. There was a warning, sir. Patton looked up. Ingle continued carefully. A corporal from map section had raised the issue during Webb's briefing. He had said the junction was wrong. He had explained the source date. He had warned the road bent southwest, not north. Patton let the silence settle. Then he asked one question. Not loud, not dramatic. Worse than that, precise. And what was done with the warning? Patton sent for Webb before the evening map update was complete. That alone told the staff the matter had not been closed by calling it a route delay. Patton did not summon a general because a road had disappointed someone. Roads disappointed armies every day. He summoned Webb because the report showed a warning had existed before the mistake reached the wheels. Webb entered with the posture of a man prepared to explain conditions, pressure, imperfect maps, and the speed of operations. Those explanations were not false. In war, every commander worked with incomplete information. Patton knew that better than anyone in the room. But incomplete information was not the same as rejected information, and that was the distinction lying on the table. The original overlay had been pinned beside the corrected sketch. Kovacs stood near the far end of the room with Sergeant First Class Ingle behind him, looking as though he would have preferred to be anywhere else. He had not asked to become part of an inquiry. He had not wanted a general punished. He had wanted the road checked before men drove onto it. Patton looked first at Webb. Was the route yours? Yes, sir. Was the overlay checked? It had been cleared through operations. Patton's eyes did not move. That is not what I asked. The room tightened. Webb corrected himself. The overlay had been reviewed, but no field confirmation had been completed after Kovacs raised the discrepancy. Patton let that sentence sit long enough for everyone to hear what it really meant. Then he turned to Kovacs. Show me. The corporal stepped forward carefully, as if the floor itself had rank. He pointed to the source date in the corner of the overlay, then to the junction Webb had used, then to the corrected sketch showing the road bending southwest. His explanation was brief. Old road network, post-flood reconstruction, junction displaced. North turn not where the overlay placed it. When he finished, he lowered his hand. Patton studied the papers. Then he looked back at Webb. Was he wrong? Webb did not answer quickly. That pause answered for him. No, sir. Patton's voice stayed flat. Then why did you move men over a road you refused to verify? No one in the room rescued Webb from the question, because there was no staff language that could soften it. The problem was no longer the map. The map had been wrong, and maps could be corrected. The failure was command. A corporal had brought a warning. A general had heard a challenge. And men on the road had paid for the difference. Patton did not punish Webb for using a bad map. That was the first thing he made clear. Bad maps existed in every army. Old overlays survived because paper moved faster than survey teams. Roads were rebuilt, bridges changed, junctions shifted, and the front moved too quickly for every sheet to be perfect. A commander could be wrong with honest information and still remain a commander. But that was not what had happened here. Webb had not simply trusted a faulty overlay. He had been warned. The warning had come before the column moved, before the engines started, before the fuel was burned in place, before the ambulance section arrived late, before men on the forward line began asking where their support had gone. That changed everything. Patton stood over the corrected map for a long moment, then looked at Webb with the same flat expression he used when studying terrain. "You were given a chance to check the road," he said. Webb tried to answer, but Patton did not give him room to build a speech. "You chose not to." There was no shouting. That made it worse. A shouted punishment can sometimes feel like temper. This did not. This felt like a decision that had already passed through the facts and found no reason to soften itself. Webb was removed from movement planning authority before the next set of orders went out. Route approval for that sector would pass through verified map review, not through Webb's confidence. His staff would submit overlays with source dates marked clearly, and any terrain discrepancy raised by map section would be checked before a column moved. It was not exile. It was not theater. It was command accountability. A general who could not tell the difference between a warning and an insult could not be trusted to move men over uncertain ground. Then Patton turned to Kovacs. The corporal stood stiffly, expecting perhaps a reprimand for having spoken out of turn, or at best permission to return quietly to the map section and disappear from the room. Instead, Patton asked Ingle one question. "Can he do this work?" Ingle answered without hesitation. "Yes, sir." Patton nodded once. "Then make sure he's where the maps are checked before the generals see them." No ceremony followed. No speech about courage. No dramatic handshake. But by the next morning, Kovacs had been moved into the verification team, and the men who had watched him get dismissed the day before understood exactly what the order meant. Webb had lost the authority he had misused. Kovacs had gained the place where his accuracy could matter. Patton's lesson was simple. The road did not care about Webb's rank. Neither did Patton. By the next day, the corrected route was already being used. That was how fast war moved. A mistake that had consumed a morning could become a lesson by evening. And by sunrise, the army expected the lesson to have become procedure. New overlays were marked with source dates. Junctions were checked against updated road notes. Map section no longer waited for permission to raise discrepancies that could affect movement. Kovacs went back to work. That was the part he preferred. He had not wanted a room full of officers looking at him. He had not wanted a general removed from authority. He had not wanted his name passed from staff desk to staff desk as the corporal who had been right. He wanted the maps corrected before men trusted them with their lives. And that was why Patton had noticed him. Not because Kovacs had challenged command. Because he had understood what command was supposed to protect. A briefing room can make rank feel permanent. Stars, eagles, oak leaves, bars, stripes. All of them tell men where to stand, when to speak, and how orders move. Without that structure, an army becomes a crowd with weapons. Patton knew that. He respected command, because command made speed possible. But he also knew the darker truth. Rank can move a column. It cannot move a road. A general can point to a junction on a map, but the ground is not required to obey him. The road will not shift north because a senior officer says it does. A bridge will not become stronger because a colonel clears it. A route will not become safe because everyone in the room is too polite to question the overlay. That was the lesson Webb had missed. His failure was not that he used a bad map. Bad maps could be corrected. His failure was that when Truth entered the room wearing a corporal's stripes, he saw only the stripes. Patton saw the cost: fuel burned, time lost, ambulances delayed, men waiting forward because someone in the rear had been too proud to verify a warning. So Patton made rank answer to reality. Webb lost the authority he had treated as personal property. Kovacs gained the place where his accuracy could protect men before the engines started. And the staff learned something no regulation could phrase as cleanly as that morning had done. The map does not salute. The road does not care who gives the order. And in Patton's army, rank could command movement. But only the ground could prove it right. So the question remained for every man who had stood in that room. When the lowest voice sees the truth first, do you hear a warning or only an insult?